why no one was fully in charge anymore. At some point, authority didn't vanish. It thinned. Decisions were still being made. Systems still functioned. Yet when outcomes surprised everyone, a strange question kept resurfacing. Who was actually in charge? London had once answered that question easily. Power had names, offices, and clear lines of responsibility. When something went wrong, escalation followed a predictable path. Authority meant visibility. Control meant accountability. Everyone knew where decisions ultimately lived. But as the financial system expanded, that clarity began dissolving. Layers multiplied. Committees replaced individuals. Coordination replaced command. Decisions were no longer singular moments. They were processes unfolding across institutions, markets, and time zones simultaneously. To understand why this mattered, we need to return to the moment when responsibility became distributed faster than it could be tracked. No one actor caused outcomes alone. Each decision made sense locally. Each adjustment appeared reasonable in isolation, but together, they produced results no single participant intended. The reveal emerged when crises arrived without culprits. Reviews found compliance everywhere. Rules had been followed, procedures respected, and yet harm had occurred. The system had acted, but without a decision anyone could point to. Authority existed everywhere and nowhere at once. This diffusion changed behavior. Participants stopped expecting leadership to intervene decisively. They adjusted defensively instead. Institutions waited for consensus before acting. Responsibility diluted into alignment. Being wrong together felt safer than being right alone. London felt the tension acutely. As a historic center, it was still expected to lead. But leadership required leverage the system no longer granted. Acting alone risked destabilizing coordination. Waiting risked irrelevance. Authority had become conditional, negotiated in real time. The city was now operating inside a paradox. Decisions were constant, but ownership was scarce. Power moved through systems faster than accountability could follow. And when outcomes turned negative, the absence of a clear decision-maker deepened distrust. London had not lost control. Control had been divided into fragments too small for anyone to fully hold. And once no one was fully in charge, the system would have to confront a harder question than governance itself. How do you manage responsibility in a world where power never sits still? As responsibility fragmented, London's financial system learned a new instinct. When no single actor held command, safety came from alignment. Institutions watched one another carefully, adjusting positions not to lead, but to avoid standing apart. Coordination became protection. This altered how decisions were made. Instead of asking what was right, participants asked what was acceptable. Instead of acting early, they waited for confirmation that others were moving too. Leadership softened into consensus, and consensus slowed into caution. Committees expanded, processes lengthened, decisions became incremental, designed to distribute responsibility rather than assert direction. No one wanted to be the outlier whose judgment failed alone. Being wrong together felt survivable. Being wrong alone felt fatal. The danger emerged when this logic became systemic. Problems that required decisive action met hesitation instead. Each institution assumed another would act first. Each delay felt rational. Together, the delays compounded. Responsibility dissolved into patience. London's institutions struggled with the consequences. Accountability frameworks assumed identifiable leaders. But leadership now existed only briefly, assembled for specific moments, then dispersed. When outcomes disappointed, there was no single hand to question, only a network that had moved in parallel. Public confidence eroded quietly, not because decisions were malicious, but because they felt unmanaged. When no one appeared fully in charge, outcomes seemed accidental. Trust depends on the belief that someone is watching the whole system. That belief began to weaken. Inside the city, anxiety grew. Participants sensed the vulnerability of leaderless coordination. Alignment could prevent chaos, but it could also prevent correction. Without someone willing to break formation, error persisted longer than it should have. London was confronting a fundamental tension. Shared power reduces abuse, but it also blurs duty. When responsibility is everywhere, it can vanish at the exact moment it is needed most. The city now faced a critical challenge. How do you create accountability without recreating the very concentration of power the system had outgrown? The conflict reached its peak when the cost of distributed responsibility became impossible to ignore. A series of escalating problems moved through the system, each one small enough to defer, each one rational enough to postpone. Together, they formed a risk no one felt authorized to confront. Institutions waited for alignment that never fully arrived. Every actor saw part of the picture, but no one owned the whole. Acting alone felt disproportionate. Acting together required agreement that took too long. The system drifted forward under its own inertia. Inside London, decision-making became increasingly defensive. Actions were framed to minimize blame rather than maximize impact. Language softened. Commitments narrowed. Leadership existed only in hindsight, after outcomes demanded explanation. The breaking moment came when delay itself became the cause of damage. A problem that required early intervention hardened into systemic stress. When action finally arrived, it was rushed, fragmented, and costly. Responsibilities surfaced, but only after consequences were locked in. Public reaction was sharp. Questions demanded answers that coordination could not provide. Who decided to wait? Who approved the delay? Who was responsible for the escalation? The system answered with silence, not from secrecy, but from structure. No one individual could be named. London confronted an uncomfortable truth. A system designed to avoid concentration of power had also avoided concentration of duty. Leadership had become episodic, conditional, and reversible. Authority appeared only when safe, and disappeared when risk emerged. The city realized that distributed power without explicit responsibility does not eliminate failure. It delays it. And when failure finally arrives, it arrives larger, harder, and far more difficult to explain. The resolution came when London accepted that shared power still required defined responsibility. Coordination could not function without anchors, moments where someone was expected to decide. Even without consensus, leadership did not need permanence. It needed obligation. New frameworks emerged that assigned responsibility by context rather than hierarchy. Decision rights activated under specific conditions. Authority rotated, but accountability did not dissolve. Someone was always designated to act when thresholds were crossed. This changed behavior immediately. Participants no longer waited indefinitely for alignment. Knowing responsibility would crystallize forced earlier engagement. Disagreement remained, but it now had a deadline. Coordination gained direction without reverting to domination. London's institutions adapted carefully. Power was still distributed, but duty became explicit. When outcomes failed, explanations followed, not because blame was sought, but because learning required ownership. The system regained memory. The city absorbed a lasting lesson. Leadership does not require control over everything. It requires responsibility for something. When power moves fluidly, accountability must be designed to appear just as fluidly. London did not rebuild a throne. It built a framework where someone always had to stand up. And in a world where no one is fully in charge, that may be the most stable solution of all. Subscribe to join the journey. Why